She won't let me film if you're down here.
Okay, well,
It's a woman thing for some reason.
you may already know what the song's about, but just for the sake of being on record, I'll explain the idea. The back of Lou White's book called Fossilized Customs. Have you seen that book? Okay.
Yeah.
So the back of his book had the Hebrew letters, the Greek letters, the meaning, the English. So you have Aleph is ox, Bet is house, Gimel's camel, Dalit's door, so forth. And those are all very real, meaning they're not only pictographs representing those objects, but the word itself means that. So that word Aleph literally is the word for ox. The word Bet is house. Gimel is camel. Dalet is door. Hey means the, but like we were just looking at the word Shir HaShirim is translated song of songs. So in that case, the letter Hey is translated the word of, not the word the. Because we say song the songs. So there's this awkward transposition of Hebrew to English sometimes in the way we think. I heard somebody say the other day that if you took somebody, say, who was born speaking Japanese and somebody else speaking Norwegian, and they both learned this other language, they're going to factor that language in their minds completely differently, because the language that you're brought up thinking organizes your mind along a certain track, path, connections, and one language will establish your brain connections, logical processes, completely different than how another language will. So even if you both learn a common language, the source, the root from where you're coming affects how it's regarded. That's just because that's the way the language works. So anyway, we're just starting to talk about these things, about the song, in case you all are interested there. Anyway, the whole idea that you can see the actual words written, there's people who have written books about the Hebrew language. And for example, Michael Brown, who's this notable scholar of the Semitic languages, said shapes of letters are simply shapes of letters. So for example, I can do and say that's going to sound like the PH sound, for example, what we call the F sound. And you go, okay, so whenever you see that symbol, that's what it's supposed to sound like. Okay, that's true. That's all the alphabet is. So if we have this alphabet shaped like this, A, B, C, D, those are just sounds. Those are the phonetic sounds. Now, just because we write these letters, if somebody else does, and then they go, I could say, well, let's pretend those are A, B, and C, D also. And you look at those and go, how? Okay. So then you have your children learn how to do these little weird shapes, and you develop an alphabet. That's what Michael Brown is saying happened with the Semitic languages. So the definition of the Semitic language group in the dictionary says, this is Webster's dictionary, it says it's the group of languages that started from a common root that has certain properties. The basic property is it has 3-letter verb roots. So in Hebrew, you could have, like the word asher has to do with speak. Well, no, that's, excuse me, Amir speak. And speak is also dabar, so you got dalet, bet, resh. And asher is to walk straight. Yishar is also going straight. Asher is the word for who. So, or happy, is being praised. So the point I'm saying is that they're basically these three-letter combinations. That's the basic, fundamental piece. And then you add suffixes, whatever those are, and prefixes. Well, that's what the Semitic language does. It has three-letter verb roots, which are composed of consonantal sounds. So in English, we go, well, A, that's a vowel. In fact, you've got 5 vowels. Here's another vowel down here in English. And it's like, well, but the Semitic language is composed of consonant sounds, and then vowels are stuck in. So if I have read and read, it's spelled exactly the same way, but I give the vowel a different sound in order to mean something. And I could also write road.
R-O-D-E.
Sure, R-O-D-E.
R-E-E-D.
R-E-E-D. And so you can say, okay, well, you change the vowels, the consonants are still the same, but if you change the vowels, it completely changes the meaning. So, somebody like Michael, what's his name?
Brown.
Or Michael Brown, jumped on my head there. If you, he says, listen, anybody assembling pictures is going to get in trouble because just like all these different words, read, road, read, just changing the vowels doesn't change the consonants. So if you have the same consonants, how can you get a dozen different words? You're just going to be confused. You try to even make sense out of it, and he says it's insane. That's right. He's right. So what do you do with the problem? So he said, listen, forget the pictures. Just go with the letter shapes. Well, if I make up these letter shapes and say that's the equivalent of sounds, like I can say this sounds like a TH, and this sounds like a CH, and that sounds like a PH or an SH. See, in English, all these are individual sounds that we don't even have letters for. So that's why we have to use combinations of letters. So if I said, well, here's all the basic sounds and here's all the combination sounds, and I make up a different set of letters, that's fair to do. He's suggesting that this letter A, which sometimes in the Paleo was written to look like that it's a completely arbitrary shape. So I tried to illustrate the other day where if I write the aleph like that, it's the motif of an ox. There's a horn and an ear, and another horn and another ear, and then there's the snout. Stick the eyeballs in if that makes it any easier. That's where the letter A came from. And he's saying no possible way did that come from an ox head.
Oh, goodness.
And you're saying, okay, whatever. So if you were going to say that the Semitic language group started with this, then if Hebrew was the original language, then at the Tower of Babel, everything starts changing. So there's a fellow by the name of Isaac Moseson. I'll write his name here. I-S-A-A-C-M-O-Z-E-S-O-N. Isaac Moseson. He, I believe at these days, lives in Israel, and he wrote a book called Origin of Speeches. I think if you look at the word Edenic on the internet, you'll probably find him. Edenic, he suggests that the original language from the Garden of Eden is this Semitic language base that world linguistic scholars call the original language, they'll say IE. That stands for Indo-European root. But it's the missing link. Nobody can find it. It doesn't exist. It's like trying to find the missing link between apes and humans. That they swear it's there, but they can't find it. Well, so the world-class linguists say, we can tell there's this phantom missing link. We're going to call it the Indo-European root, but they've never found it. There is no Indo-European root. And Isaac Moseson says it's actually this Hebrew alphabet, the Hebrew language. But he won't call it Hebrew, he calls it Edenic, because if he calls it Hebrew, then everybody else is going to get bent out of shape thinking he's being biased because he's a Jew. And, you know, so the point is, the word Jewish came from the word Yehuda when Leah, who was Jacob's wife, had the fourth son. And so any language spoken before that son was born wouldn't be called the Jewish language. And if Abraham was considered the first Hebrew, Eber, that word actually came from his grandfather named Eber, which means to cross over or to trespass, or it's where we get the word neighbor. And so before that it wasn't even called Hebrew, so what would have been the language before the Tower of Babel? Well, there's reason to believe, which his book, he does a fantastic job of showing you how the language has changed. So we think at the Tower of Babel that one day everybody's speaking the same language, and then all of a sudden you're speaking French, they're speaking Spanish, this guy's speaking Russian, this guy's speaking Ugandan, Chinese, and it's like, did that happen? Or perhaps, what if it was a little bit slower evolution? What if somehow words just started getting slurred and twisted around, like Sibboleth and Shibboleth, for example, is that one story in the Old Testament. And what he found is that there's 7 basic things that your tongue and your lips do, which are at the root of all these Semitic languages. Now there's some languages which are not based on the Semitic model, and you could say probably Chinese, Japanese, Korean, those are a whole different sort of construct. But at least regarding the Semitic languages, there's 7 basic things that happened. B and P got flipped around. T and TH and TZ and ST, those got kind of intermingled. M and N, R's and L's, they shift places. So that's how the languages all morphed. So when they originally morphed at the Tower of Babel, they continued evolving until what we have today. And he has this great mind of being able to notice and identify instantly what these changes are. So he has access to a couple hundred different languages where he can look at it and go, I'll tell you exactly how that came out of Hebrew. Because there's verb roots. For example, the word giraffe. They say, well, there's some Indo-European root that must have come from this word here. And he said, it comes from the Hebrew word charef, which is the scruff of the neck. And the giraffe has this scruffy, long neck. So the question is, if Adam was going to name the animals, and he sees this guy with a long neck, he could have called him Necky, because it's all about his neck. Well, that's kind of what he did by calling him Charaf. Well, Charaf became giraffe in English. And some of the words are just that simple. So you have to go back and say, well, does the word for the scruff of the neck have anything to do with why it's called that? Isaac Moseson will show you to some degree that stuff. Frank Seekins, in his book Hebrew Word Pictures, he'll show you stuff. And a very simple one is that you have the word for sun, S-O-N, is bet noon. That's sun. Bet is a house. Noon is that which jumps, like a fish jumping out of the water, so it's the letter that's lively, like a grasshopper jumps. So who is it that is born in the house and then jumps out? Or who is it that provides life to the house? A son. And B'nai could, if it's B'nai or Benim, it could be son or daughter or children. So it's basically children are the life of the house. So when Frank Seekins noticed that, he realized, oh, okay, there's something to this. So pictographically, that doesn't look like a house, but if I drew it like this, So it's more like an embryo shape, even, and say, oh, that's a developing fetus sort of a thing. And if I drew it like this, so if you're looking straight down over the top, here's the front door of the house, you know, the public space, and then you go around the corner, and this is the private space, or your bedroom type of a thing, if you're looking straight down over the top. If you draw it like this, which is the modern Hebrew, you could say, well, here's the foundation, here's the wall, and here's the top, like it was some type of a tent, even if it didn't have a front structure. It's some kind of enclosure, it's some kind of a house. So to say that none of the letters have any value in their orthograph would be the shape of the letters, it's just wrong. The benefit of the letters that I chose to put in this group, called the Eryctology font, is because, just so you know, you cannot go find an ancient artifact and find every one of those letter shapes in the collection of the alphabet. There's one they found somewhat recently that I think was written on a rock, and it doesn't even have all the letters, but the letters it had, almost all of them are exactly the same as what I have. But what I did is I looked through in an encyclopedia, different encyclopedias, wherever I could find different records. This was back before the stuff was online like it is now. But I looked through all these encyclopedic charts showing ancient artifacts, including places like the Etruscan alphabet that came out of the same thing, ancient Greek, so forth and so on, and I tried to find the letter shape which most readily and easily depicted what the letter means with its own self-expression. So for example, there was one ancient letter of the Zion that looked like this. And I draw it like this, and some people draw it like this. You could say, well, come on, how could that all be the same letter? What does that mean? Well, this is the picture of a plowshare. If you were to yoke this up, or it had even a person, you know, pulling this and pulling that and walking this direction, pulling this spiked plowshare, it would carve a rut into the ground here and here, right? He's pulling it across the ground. It's a picture of a plowshare. So instead of drawing the little spikes, which is extra material, it became just drawn like that, which might be a top view. So one meaning of the letter Zion is a weapon. How's a plowshare a weapon? Well, if your back was like the earth and you drag a plowshare across it, the equivalent is a Roman whip with these sharp pieces of metal that rip your back open. Like what happened to Yeshua. But the letter also means to cut off. You don't cut off anything with a plowshare. So now there's a choice between, should the weapon look like an axe or should the weapon look like a plowshare? Well, if you look in the meaning of the letter, it also says it means a spear or a sword or a knife. But you don't chop anything off with a knife or a spear. Yes, it's a weapon, but what's the action that's happening? So what I did is I chose to make it look like an axe, because an axe chops. You have a package of 7 and it's cut off. After the 7th day it was cut off. Messiah came down here, he was put to the weapon and cut off. He was cut off from the land of the living. So the idea for the Zion to be the letter that says somebody is cut off. Who's the somebody? Well, because all the letters read in sequence, it's referring to the letter right before it. That Vav was cut off. Now, somebody like Michael Brown, and I just keep mentioning his name because we looked at his video the other day, and he's a big shot Semitic language guy, so out of respect for him to say, yes, he's done decades of study about Semitic languages. I did not study Semitic languages for all those years, just so you know. So if you want to believe the scholar, listen to Michael Brown. I spent hardly any time studying the Semitic languages. But I did study film animation in particular. And an animated film is made frame by frame. So if you have a flip book, you know what those are? You know, you take a little thing, you draw pictures and you watch her move like that, and it seems to dance around, right? So, in the back of Lou White's book, ox, house, camel, door, and I thought, I just had the thought, what if these letters were put on a flip book? How would they look? What would be the animated sequence? I don't know that anybody else has done this, but I did this. Maybe other people have done it. I don't know. It has nothing to do with that. It's just thought, whimsical thought. So I thought, if you could take the Aleph and when you're doing a film, you make what's called a storyboard. It's kind of like a cartoon strip. You have this major scene, and then this major scene, and this major scene. It's kind of like if you didn't have time to read a book, and you decided to just read the chapter headings. Boom, 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 boom. You could get a pretty good feeling of what the sense of the book was about. So I had the thought, perhaps that's what's happening with the Hebrew letters. Perhaps they're like chapter headings, or like a storybook where you're showing this picture, and then this picture, and then this picture, and then the in-betweens has to be animated to get from here to there. So if the major staging of the alphabet is an ox, and then a house, well, it's left up to your wild imagination of how to get from ox to house, and then from house to camel, and then from camel to door. And if I gave you a list of these things and said, here, make up a story, people could make up 10,000 stories. Maybe more. Michael Brown's right about that. By golly, you can make up any story you want. Go ahead. Just have fun. It's like giving crayons to kids and say, draw any picture you want. Who's to say one is by God's breath and the other one is, oh, that must be the devil. Whatever. The point is, it's art. Poetic license. So I was sitting there saying, well, what if the Aleph is not just an ox, but it's something represented by the ox? And then, so as I was trying to describe the other day, the Aleph is also kind of the shape of this arrowhead, and the Tav is this sign kind of like a target, and so you shoot at the target. The same way you yoke up an ox and pull it to the mark, and it cuts a furrow, a plow line, and then I noticed some verses. I just noticed some verses in the Bible where Yahweh said, as I have planned, so shall it be. As I have purposed, so shall it rise. The word that goes out of my mouth won't return void. It'll accomplish what I set forth to do. And I noticed it's like, that's kind of like, Aleph is this plan, like the archer shoots the arrow to hit the target. And that plan is going to happen. So that's an Aleph Tav concept. Now, Bill Sanford wrote a book called the Masoretic Aleph Tav Scriptures, MATS, M-A-T-S, Messianic Aleph Tav, M-A-T, Scriptures, yes, M-A-T-S. And in it, he highlighted all the Aleph Tavs. And he said, wherever you see the Aleph Tav, that's referring to Yeshua, because Yeshua said, I am the Aleph Tav. Okay, if every time you see the word Aleph Tav, you think, oh, that's Yeshua. Then you start reading through the scripture, oh, that's talking about Yeshua, that's talking about Yeshua, that's talking about Yeshua. And it's like, is it or is it not? Is there something about that concept? But what is it? Perhaps there's more to the concept. But if I can see the verse where Yahweh himself says, as I planned, so shall it be. And then as I'm looking through scripture, I see dozens of places with that same kind of talk. That He, the Almighty, intends on doing something, and it will happen before the end of the world, or else the world can't end. So when Yeshua said, not one jot or tittle will be removed or fail to be happening for whatever the intentions were, then you say, well, what are the jots and tittles? As long as the heaven and earth stand, then it's like, well, are the jots and tittles saying something, or is there a message, or what's going on? So you got to figure that the way this place is designed is that the Almighty created something, He has a purpose or an agenda or a progression of events, and then he's going to say, okay, then now it's time, now it's fulfilled. That concept is what I see is the Aleph Tav concept. Now, if Bill Sanford says, yeah, but because Yeshua said, that's him, then in mathematics, in algebra, the very simple algebraic equation, it says, here, if A equals B, and if B equals C, then A equals C. Because if this letter is the same as that letter, then that letter is the same as that letter, and you can sit there and try to say, oh, I don't understand. I'll exercise wrapping my mind of logic and where. Okay, the struggle of a child in a mathematics class is that their brain doesn't necessarily know how to do that yet. And when you send them to school and the teacher just pounds this into your head and you're like, "Ugh," it's to get your brain to work a certain way to just get it. Just take it as a given, as that you might say. And it's like, I don't understand. Okay, well, how do you wrap your mind to understand something this simple? Now, I can say it's something this simple because I learned it a long time ago, but somebody else might say, I just don't get it. Can you put it into other words? But what I'm saying is this. If the alphabet is the plan of Elohim, and the plan describes Yeshua, then the plan is Yeshua. The alphabet is Yeshua. The alphabet describes the plan of Yeshua from saying, I'm going to come down, I'm going to make a universe and accomplish this whole thing and then finish it and say, call it Project Earth, Project Adam. This is the human project. Well, is that the end of it? Tav, end, we say, put a cross on your gravestone or X marks the spot, that's the end of the road, there's no more. That's only the scope of what he's given us. When this phase is over, it's a whole new eternity that we have no idea what's going on. Paul said, we can't even imagine the things he has prepared for us. Then Yeshua came talking, saying, let me reaffirm to you, no little thing that you do or think or put your hands to or even an emotion in your heart, nothing you do on the face of the earth is lost. It's all being recorded. What'd you do? And one of these days you might see this big video, or at least he'll replay it in your mind, and you might go, or you might go, I'm glad you noticed. And it's written down on record for eternity that you had a thought of regard towards him, towards his stuff. And that's what Malachi 3:16 says. It says, then those who feared or had a reverence for Yahweh, they spoke with one another. That's what we're doing here. And just because you get together and speak about him, thinking about him, hashing over, even if it's silly little mundane stuff like which calendar, how do you pronounce the name? Is this really unleavened bread or not? Does this count? Does it have to have baking soda? Is it yeast? Just talking about his stuff. He says, then those who had a reverence, a fear for Yahweh, got together and they spoke about his things. And then Yahweh, sitting in his throne room, calls for this book, this scroll, to be right there on his coffee table, right next to him. He says to some angel, your job is to write down the names of all those who think about my name. And on the day that I present to the universe my most precious treasure, then you'll see the difference between those who regard my things and those who care less of my things. And these people These names are my most precious treasure. That's incredible. How do you become... He said, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. And he's talking about David saying, and you think you're going to make a house for me? What gift do you give to the creator of the universe? Pondering his things. One reason for sitting here, taking a day, taking the week of unleavened bread, or the week of Sukkot, is to say every day, we're just going to sit and talk about his stuff. And then you got 6 more months to find other questions, bump into other interesting, what do you do with this? And then you get together again for a whole other week and talk about his stuff. And if you can see no other value, at least there's the value of getting our names written in that book that sits right in front of his footstool, as it were. Not that he had his feet up on a footstool, but just to use the illustration that we've been given. So the concept is to say, if this whole thing is Yeshua, because he claimed to be the Aleph Tav, then the word Shem, which is name, remember he said, write down the names of those people who ponder my name. If somebody says, what's his name? God. God is God. I've heard that preached many times. Well, he gave himself a name. That's right. It says, the Lord is my name. Only that was the name that was plugged in about 400 or 500 years ago. The name that was really there was spelled Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Well, how do you say that? Yehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Iahuah. The point is, the word Shem also means fame, renown, reputation. So it's not just how do you pronounce the name. That might have a little bit to do with it, but what does fame, renown, reputation, fame, what you're known for? If somebody says, man, this guy loves horses. He just is all about horses. And you go, that's not me. I don't even have a horse. I don't care about horses. I like Jeeps, man. Jeeps is my thing. Horses, it's like, well, somebody mistook you for somebody else. You got the wrong Shem. You may know his name is George McDonald, but you got the wrong Shem, even if you know how to pronounce his name, because he's not into horses, he's into Jeeps. That's Shem. The Shem is, what are you about? So the word Shem also is the word translated, the word here, and the word there. So you're saying, where's you at, man? I was right here. This is my stuff. I like this music. I like these horses. I like to wear a certain hat. That's my thing. That's your Shem. So in Leviticus 23, where Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh says, hey, Israel. Now, he's not talking to anybody else in the world. He's talking to his people, Israel. And he says, these are my Moedi. Now, plural is Moedim. But Moedi, you go, oh, wait a minute. Is that, oh, he just forgot to write the letter M there. That's a phonetic mistake. Wait a minute. Edi in the dictionary means choice, best, treasure. And it means to be adorned and ornamented, to be bejeweled. It's like he gets out his fanciest clothes and his best necklace with shiny, sparkly, this is the best. Out of everything he's ever created, this is the best of his personal adornment. It's the Sabbath day and the 7 festivals. This is his choice, best treasure by which he has adorned himself. And the word ed also means witness and testimony. So the way to read this is, these are the things which most correctly, clearly describe or bear witness of who he is and what is his Shem. What is he all about? He invented these things. He designed these things. And he says to Israel, hey, this is my stuff and I'm giving it to you. And the same word is used to describe an appointed time, so that because the same word moed can also mean appointed time, then he's also saying at the same time, these are the very occasions where I am going to stop my entire schedule of running the universe, and I'm going to interface and meet and sit right with you and hang out together with you. These particular times. Now, you could be walking anywhere in the universe on a spaceship flying to Mars, or even David said, you know, if my soul goes down to hell, or if I'm floating up into space, you're there. He's everywhere. You can worship him any day of the week. You can sit in church on Sunday. That doesn't matter, but these days are appointed times. Something about these days. Which is why people that I now know are, you might say, struggling, or not out of frantic, oh, I got to save myself and earn my way to heaven. It's not about that. They're just trying to say, what is the right calendar? We want to make sure they're there on the right day, because that's what he said. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you have the wrong calendar by mistake, that he's not going to be there, which is to say, instead of regarding Sukkot, 7th month, 15th day, you keep December 25th, and then the week between Christmas and New Year is just as sacred as the week between the 15th and the 22nd, because he said the 7th month, between the 15th and 22nd days, the two festivals of Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret. He did not say the solstice festival in the 12th month. I'm not saying you're going to go to hell if you do that, but I'm just saying it's not about who's going to burn in hell. The question is, what did he say? When does he want to meet with us? That's what it's about. We're just trying to find that so we can meet with him. Here's the point. What I noticed in flipping through the alphabet in this animated sequence, that all of a sudden the space between the letter Het and the letter Zadi fit the Moedim. It was patterned after the same 7 festivals, which is the same pattern of the 7 days of creation, which was the same pattern of the Mishkan. He, in Exodus 25, told Moshe, make the pattern of the Mishkan on earth the same, identical as the pattern of the Mishkan I'm showing you in heaven. Make sure it's exactly the same. So this pattern of the Mishkan was not something Moses invented. It was something that already existed in the heavens. When did he make that pattern? Well, gee, the heavens might have existed for 20 jillion years. How do we know when it existed? Well, he tells us. Genesis 1. He made the heavens and the earth. Goes through 7 days. He rested the 7th day, so it had to be something, had to be everything in the heavens and the earth, it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. Thus everything in the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their array. That means every one of the basic objects and everything around having to do with them were completed as of Genesis 2, verse 1. So when he shows Moshe, hey, check out this pattern, which was a couple thousand years later, I think that pattern had to have been made back there in Genesis 1 and finished as of Genesis 2. So Moses didn't invent the pattern. It was way back then. So I can say, boy, this pattern is at least as old as Genesis 1, and because Genesis 1 has or is built according to the pattern had to be before Genesis 1. So therefore, because the pattern had to exist before Genesis 1, and it includes the 7 days and the 7 Moedim of Leviticus 23, and it's the same pattern as the Mishkan of Exodus 25, and when Yeshua gave the Sermon on the Mount, it's the same pattern, then it's like, gosh, all this is the same pattern, and then when I find that the meanings of the letters correlate to the critical events in Yeshua's life, it's like, well, then he had to have that plan before he made the earth. So what he was going to come and do, being put to death for our sins and resurrecting, that was the plan from the beginning that was incorporated into the plan of the 7 days, the 7 festivals, the pattern of the Mishkan, and the Beatitudes, and here it is in the alphabet. It's like there is no possible way that this alphabet was borrowed from the Egyptians by Moses, tweaked to make it look Jewish, and that the symbols don't mean anything. It absolutely correlates to every one of those things. You got a question?
Yeah, can you just describe for the illiterate what exactly Mishkan is?
Sure.
Or what it
The word Mishkan is found in Exodus 25. You'll also see that where it says the pattern of the Mishkan.
26, 20? What's up,
was it the tabernacle?
Well, the word pattern is tabanit. Here, see, oh, right, ta, bin, eat. Tabanit. Tav, bet, nun, yod, tav. T-B-N-I-T. Consonantals, they're the yodas. So that's a word that's called pattern or model. Then he says the word Mishkan, which is mem. Well, I'll write in both. Mem, shin, kaf, nun. So modern is mem, shin, kaf, nun. So the modern has what's called a nun sofit, so it's drawn differently. If it was regular nun, it would look like that. This has, kaf has long legs, this one has short legs, but nun sofit. So if you looked in your Tanakh, you'd see it written like that. So mem is a prefix letter, which means the place of, or the place where you're from, or to be away from. It means a few different things. As I mentioned the other day, if you have the word garden, which is gone, gimel nun, a garden is something which is guarded. Kindergarten, kinder, that's where you have children and you guard the children, you keep an eye on them. So a garden is something you guard. It's a piece of land you put your eye to, you water it nicely, keep the rabbits out, you make sure it's filtered sunlight so you don't scorch the plant. It's the areas that you look to. Well, how do you, what device do you use to do guarding? The device that you use, when you put the mem in front of it, it becomes the name of the device that does the protection. So this word is mogan, where we get the girl's name Megan, and it literally means guard or shield. It's technically it's shield. So if you were going to go fight and people are throwing snowballs at you, and you held up a trash can lid, that trash can lid is your mogan, even though there's no garden. But it's serving the job of protecting, and that's what a garden is all about. So I'm trying to show you in Hebrew how you take the word concept and you have to move around with it in order to find how it fits.
So you got to have a noggin to protect your noggin.
A noggin to protect the noggin, exactly.
That's a good way to remember it.
So, again, Michael Brown, for him to say there's no correlation of how to put letters in, I disagree. But he'll say, hey, this represents water. So how is water a shield of the garden? A garden, by definition, in the dictionary says a well-watered place. In other words, out in the desert, there isn't enough water, and here you have plenty of water. So what?
It would be like a moat.
You could put a moat, which would be an irrigation canal, around a garden. If you put a moat around a castle, now you're protecting the castle with some type of shield. So are you watering the garden with an irrigation trench, or are you protecting the castle with a moat? It's the same thing. And that's putting water around the garden. So what I'm saying is that, well, how do you get water if it's a shield? And that's where somebody's their own brain might go, I can't deal with this. So don't. You don't have to learn Hebrew to be saved. I'm not saying that. And I keep reiterating that because I've been accused of saying that. Okay, so I'm just trying to make it perfectly clear. This is all for your own fun, your own interest. your own intrigue, treasure hunting. But what I found is when he said, write the name of the people who ponder my Shem, what I found is that the spelling of Hebrew words seems to be, I can't find the verse that I found this, but as I was translating this verse, it seemed like I was able to determine from pulling things out that the spelling of words is the sport of the heavens. Imagine that. You might have soccer or baseball or basketball being a, or curling, the sport of Canada or something. But the sport of the heavens is spelling words? Now somebody could debate that with me, but the word yitzhak means sport or amusement as well as laughter, and it was something having to do with that word, I believe. But what I'm saying is, what if that were true? Even if you want to disagree, what if it were true that he invented the spelling of words, and he, that guy that we, there's that song that we used to sing in church, I just want to know you more, to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly. Well, what if you found that what is dear to his heart is that he loves this game, this sport of spelling words. And it just so happened to be that he invented the Semitic Edenic language of Hebrew, and that's his favorite language that he chose to communicate with his people as the family language. And then he caused all the other languages to morph and permutate away at the Tower of Babel, just so he could call his people back to this, and says, gee, I wonder if any of them will take pleasure in what I take pleasure in. I wonder if any of the people will dress up in my attire, the Moedim, because I think it looks so sporty and nice and flashy. And I say that because there's this other verse where he seemed, I can't remember where it is, but he says that he dressed up his woman, Israel, in his attire because he thought it looked so nice, which would be like these Moedim, and Israel goes, ew, yuck, these stinky old rags. I want to dress up like the Assyrians and the Egyptians. And everybody else who's my enemy and the enemy of Yah, and I think that looks nicer. I think I'd rather be dressed up in that. How do you think he feels about that?
Oh, just a comment.
Yes.
And Yeshua even said that I speak to his Talmudim, I speak to you in parables too. And it's not for the rest of the people to understand, it's only for you to understand right now. And he made another comment too, that if they understood it, that they would essentially treat it as, common or treat it wrongly.
If the other people understood these things, they'd step on it, like don't cast your pearls before the swine, they'll just step on them and tear you to pieces.
Yeah.
So he's kept these things that are dear to his heart to show them as treasures, to hopefully find a people who will also find them dear to their hearts. That's what this stuff is all about. And so what I'm saying is that I can sit here and say, Mem is the object that does the guarding, and somebody can say, how is it water? That doesn't make any sense. Phooey, shut the door and leave, and it's like, okay, now let's ponder it and talk about it. And what I think is that the Hebrew language is so packed full that we could spend probably all day pondering just the word spelled Mem Gimel Nun and find all kinds of stuff. And you might end up saying, well, so what? What does that get me? It got me a waste of a day. Did I earn any money? It's not about earning money.
It's a Mishkan.
So get back to Mishkan. So Mem is the place or the object. Then Shin is also a prefix letter that means essentially that which belongs to, kind of Shin Lamed, but you'll find that if you look in the beginning of the Shin section. Nun at the end suffix means to be something engaged in the action of. You may not find that written in the dictionary, but you'll find that if you look at all the words that end in nun, it looks like something is engaged in the action. You have to do that just by compiling your own study of information, of noticing how words are spelled. But this word kaf nun, you know that pretty famous picture from World War II where the Rosie the Riveter, she's got her arm, yes we can. This is the word can. Can. Kaf Nun, K-N. And it means in the dictionary, yes, so, truly, thus.
Ken.
Because, like Barbie and Ken, same word, Ken. It means yes.
He can never say no to Barbie, right?
From what I understand, I'm not sure what Barbie means offhand, but that whoever had those names was a Jewish or Hebrew-speaking person who... There was a lady years ago who was giving a talk at a conference. I think she was the one who had invented those, and there was a talk about that. But anyway, I think that's why it was named Ken. It's like the yes, dear. So if that's the word for yes, you'll see in the dictionary where it says sheken is actually the word that means to be neighborly, which is essentially the same exact synonym as Eber, which is Eber, that's Hebrew word to cross over, where we get the word neighbor, which is the one to, see that's the A, that's the ayin sound, there's the B, the bet, and there's the R there. So Aber, and just so you know, that's where Nibiru, the phantom planet, gets its name. This Nun is the prefix letter, and Eberu is where you get the word Hebrew, which comes from Eber, Abraham's grandpa.
So it's a neighboring planet of a different solar system.
Of another solar system coming into our neighborhood. It's crossed. Of course, I know a guy who's an astronomer here who says there is no Nibiru. It's all just conspiracy bunk. But some people swear there is. The point is, it's the planet which is coming from somebody else's solar system into our neighborhood. It's crossing, transgressing the property line. So the word Eber can also mean, or Hebrew can also mean to transgress or cross over the line. That's where that comes from. Well, the word sheken means to dwell together. Sheken is the word translated tabernacle. So taber, T-A-B-E-R, nacle. The B and the V is the same letter in Hebrew and Spanish, and so the Greek taverno, same thing. See, they just changed that letter there, right? Taverno is where we get the word tavern. So the tabernacle is like going down to the local pub or the local Dairy Queen or the local shake shop, where you just hang out with your friends and eat and drink and talk and shoot pool or throw darts or whatever you might do down there, right? So the tabernacle is literally the place of neighboring, hanging out together, where everybody's in agreement to just relax and get along, have a good time. You could do that even at your local library, only there's no talking there. I'm just saying, it's like people just come to hang out together, nobody's fighting, nobody's causing any trouble. So when Yahweh says, this is the pattern of the Mishkan, he says, so that I may dwell, and then there's this word, I believe it's betok, and the word, I think there's a bet in front, but it's tav, vav, kaf, and this word tok is, in the dictionary it means a stitch or a seam, which you picture a needle being punctured in, but it also means to be internal or punched right into the middle of something, like a hypodermic needle, to get the injection right into the mass. And he says, this is the Mishkan where I'm just going to be punched right down from that dimension, as it were, into our realm, our dimension, right in the middle of the camp. This is going to be the pattern of the thing which provides him to be in our midst. And then when he was present, you see this, right above the Ark of the Covenant, you see this pillar of fire, if you could maybe draw it like this, vortex, and pillar of smoke, it's almost like this billowing smoke, and coming up from, and so I pictured, it's like, well, what would that, I kind of picture that as this exclamation point over the Ark of the Covenant, and this big question mark like the billowing smoke. So I've used this shape of the question mark and the exclamation point as a graphic model of the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke over the Ark of the Covenant. And you could say, well, what's that got to do with anything? It's like, exclamation point, this is like him being injected straight in. And if there's any questions about anything, it's like, go ask him. And what was in here? The Ark of the Covenant, and there was inside of that the tables of stone that he wrote on, the manna that budded, and the manna that appeared in Aaron's rod that budded. Those three things. And you could say, well, what has that got to say? Aaron's rod that budded, because people were saying, well, how do you know who's supposed to be the high priest? And he made this dead stick come back to life. That's a picture of Yeshua who's dead coming back to life. When people say, who is this scoundrel? Is he just some jerk, some loudmouth claiming to be a prophet? Well, let's kill him and see where his words go. Well, popped back to life. So the Zodi is a picture of a sprout of him coming back to life on the day of the resurrection. And then you can say, well, the manna, well, that was miraculous provisions. And he said all along, if you guys would believe my words, then I will give you miraculous provisions that you can't even see them coming, but I promise that they'll come. Okay, that's what we believe in. And he says, but in order for you to get those miraculous provisions, you got to regard these words. And he wrote the Devarim, 10 matters, on the tables of stone. So that's what's in the Ark of the Covenant. So I think the significance of those three things that were in there brings all this attention to the words. Like if there's any question, like the billowing pillar of smoke, it's right here, the answer's right there in these words. So I could say, well, which words? There's something like 186 words, I think, or something, in the 10 Commandments. Don't do this, don't do that. And people, nobody can keep the law. And say, wait a minute. It didn't say, thou shalt not kill. It didn't say that. Some people say, thou shalt not murder, okay, but it doesn't even say that. What it says is, no murder. Well, if somebody says, hey, here's a promise, here's 10 things which will make you wealthy. What does wealthy have anything to do with it? The number 10, ayin shin resh, literally means to make wealthy, or to be enriched. If I just wrote the word ayin shin resh, you have no idea, without vowel point and without context, whether that's the number 10 or the word that means wealthy. Same word. And the word Devarim is not the word commandments. It's the word for words, but it's also matters. So you could say, these are 10 matters which enrich. Okay, so if I said the 10 matters that enrich, one of them is no murder, and then I can tell that he told us, when you go away to the festivals, don't be afraid of somebody coming back to your land and robbing you while you're gone. He said, be fearless, of great courage. I think when he said no murder, there's two ways to read that. One, he meant don't you go murder. And the other one is he won't allow anybody to come murder. What are the benefits of the covenant? No murder. What are the benefits of the covenant? No stealing. No committing adultery. He doesn't say thou shalt not. That's in English. So, well, yeah, that's what he meant. We shouldn't be about the business of doing that. Well, that's true. But what he said was no murder, no stealing, no committing adultery. So what I'm suggesting is that there's a different way to read the words of the 10 Commandments. I did a talk on that. It's on the website under the Montana 10 Commandments. It was a few years ago, just for what it's worth. That's a whole big talk. But I'm just saying there's different ways to read things. So, if there's different ways to read things, depending on how you read it, and if I can say the Zodi sprouting, they'll tell you that a Zodi means a man laying on his side with his knee in the air, and it's the word for a hunter. The word zad, zadi dalet, literally means side. Because in the paleo, one way to write it is a line with a sprout. Another way to write it is that you'll see something like that. Or maybe even something like that. It's something with something sprouting. How do you know the real way to write it? One way is they even do this. And then they'll draw the noon like that. So the zadi looks like this, and the noon looks like that. It's like, is it a zadi or a noon? But you'll see scrolls written in the paleo ancient scribes, well, that's what they did. And I'm supposed to guess, and then you'll see, even on some of those charts, that's a bet, and that's a resh. Only the scribe's hand is so shaky, it's like, now which one is that supposed to be? That's ridiculous. What is it? Is it a bet or a resh? Okay, so in the font that I use, that's a bet, and that's a resh. There, you can tell the difference. Just the other day, I saw a publication, written, modern, and they drew this letter, and they said, that's a resh.
That's a dollar.
That's a dalet! But it was right there in this publication. You know, a resh in modern is that. So when I write a dalet, I'll try to make this a little bit more distinct. But it doesn't look like that. You know, so on the chart, just so you know, the modern letters are a little bit distorted. And I did that on purpose to slightly exaggerate the feature that made them distinctive. It looks kind of sloppy. It was done on purpose to just be an exaggeration. Right? So the letter Tav looks like that. But sometimes you'll see the slightest little thing. The letter Kaf looks like this. And so then they'll put a little flourish on top, and they'll bring the Kaf around that. And then they'll draw the letter Bet. It's like, gosh, if you have bad printing, you can't tell the difference. Literally, you can't tell the difference. You know, they might have this coming out, it's like, oh gosh, did they have little tiny? No, then that makes it a bet. It's like, who's horrible is green's interlinear. You can't tell the difference between a hey, a het, and a tav, or between a dalet and a resh, a kaf, and a bet. Gosh, it's just. And some of the pages are fuzzy, and you think, well, I'll get the bigger version instead of the little one. They took the exact same stencil plate to publish the big version, and it's just as scratchy and messed up on some of the pages.
It's just sort of like echad versus echad. You know, because of the resh, it's way different meanings.
So the point is, drawing the letter styles that I have on that chart, picked the clearest letters from all the Semitic ancient languages, real archaeological items, but I put together a collection of the clearest ones. So for example, the letter het means offense. A fence, not offense. So sometimes you'll see it written like that. Sometimes it's written like that, with a line through it. But, just so you know, the reason why I took that letter het is because somebody said that the constellation known as the Big Dipper are sheep coming out of the sheepfold. And then the Little Dipper is another sheep coming out of the sheepfold. But the pioneers coming across the American plains said, hey, it looks like a ladle, you know, like the soup ladle for the matzo ball soup we had. That's what it looks like. Okay, so it's a dipper. Well, ancient tales say, no, it's Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. Well, Ursa's a bear. Bears don't have long tails. That can't be a bear. But somebody just said, we'll call it a bear. We'll call it a ladle, we'll call it a bear. But then, from ancient times, this is a sheep pen. And these are the sheep leaving. And this then, you might say, is the sheep, or maybe the sheep are coming back, either way. But that's one sheep pen. And here's another sheep pen, with the sheep getting kicked out or coming back in. And both sheep pens are held together by one nail, or one vav. Okay, So here's two sheep pens held together by one common vav. Yeshua said, I'm the door. Well, if he's the vav man, vav is number 6, number for man, number 6, then he's like the one shepherd holding together the two sheepfolds, like the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda is mentioned numerous places, though the people who are one house don't like the mention of two houses, but these two houses, house of Israel, house of Yehuda, or the house of Ephraim and Israel, those are mentioned numerous times in the scripture, and that's a whole other discussion not to get into. But the point is, so I draw this letter, right? So you got this one sheepfold, and here's the other sheepfold, and it's pinned together by the vav. So that's kind of like this prophetic statement, as it were. It's not just a fence. You know, a fence you might set up like this and put the fence posts in. It's the same picture, it's just a fence, but so I drew it that way as a picture, a pictograph of the combined houses of Israel held together by their leader, Shiloh, the one to whom it belongs, holding together his two flocks.
And Yeshua says, I've not come but for the lost sheep of Israel. So it's like they're either leaving when we were dispersed across the four corners, and he was going to regather the lost sheep then.
Exactly. So to draw the letter that way, in my mind, brings about that memory of that event, whereas if I drew it like this or some other way, it doesn't do that. So I tried to find the letters' shapes which actually cause the remembering. So the letter Het, the recollection, the reconfiguration of the two houses, the letter Zion being cut off, but yet at the same time, it was Yeshua's back, like the earth, that was ripped open with the plowshare of the Roman flail, the way the plow would rip open the earth to create furrows to plant seeds. And the Zadi, like Aaron's rod that budded. So instead of drawing the Zadi that looks like just a seed that's a sprout, I draw it to look like Aaron's rod that budded, that was put in the Ark of the Covenant. And the Resh, here's a guy with some kind of wearing a yarmulke or a hat, but Resh looks like this ennobled man. So this, I've done this with people before. Here, I just draw this shape. And what does that remind you of? Might be a head, might be a flag.
Flag, yeah.
And people come up with all sorts of different things. Just that shape. If you look at each one of these letters by their own shape and come up with what they mean, you can read into the orthography, because I believe they're self-explanatory. Yet with other collections of letter shapes, you don't get that so easily. So, yeah, go ahead. I was going to say my own subjective choice, artistic license, I chose those letter samples to include in one letter set, which I'm just calling the Erictology, because the word Eric means to organize something and put it in such a form that it can be easily understood and given a value. So the county appraiser comes here and says, let's see, you got so many square feet, and your house has so many amenities, how many bathrooms, market value, it's worth this. He's doing the same thing. And that's really exactly what the word Ayin Resh Kaf means. Go ahead.
So Mashiach, does that end with a kaf or a
Het?
Het. Okay. So just thinking of Mishkan and then Mashiach with it.
Yeah, so that's, mem, well here, just so you're asking the question. Mashiach is Mem, Shin, Yod, Het. So Shin, Yod, Het literally means conversation, but it also means to swim. And it also means, you know how you have a gully, a drainage ditch cut by the side of the road? It's one of those. And then you could say, well, Mem is the place, so it's the place where somebody swims. Well, where do you swim? Well, you might swim in that drainage ditch cut on the side of the road, because when it fills up with water, now you have a place to swim. But what's that got to do with the Mashiach? But Shianoid also means conversation or communication, to converse. So the one who, why'd you come here? Oh, that's right, to communicate, to converse. To who? He'll put his, He came here to be the one who, by his hand, holds the two houses together. I could choose it to read that way. Of course, somebody else, like Mr. Brown, could say, and say, well, I can see that. The one who's here, who by the communication, which is the covenant, is holding together the two houses of the covenant. So I choose to read that that's the way to read the word. But somebody else could disagree, and somebody else might come up with something completely different. So go flip through the dictionary, and you can find words that mean, like shin het, you could put in vav in between, or the yod, and you could put other prefixes and suffixes, and I mean, you could again spend an hour just, you could spend a week just studying that word. Yeah.
I think the het looks like the two sticks in Ezekiel almost.
You could
With
do
the
that too.
vav, I mean, with the nail in the side.
See, when I first started writing the chart, I had this line going all the way through. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I changed it to look like a nail. But again, that's just an artist's rendering. You don't even have to have these things too tall. I mean, that's a letter het also. So, but I'm just saying, because of the way you draw the letter shape, your mind goes different places on account of how you draw the letters. That's the point. If you draw the letters differently, you will think a different thing. So go ahead and look at the different letter shapes. Look at the way Jeff Benner writes the letters, ancient Hebrew site. You know, my letter shape, like I said, was, I picked these. But if you really wanted to do a big study, look at the Greek letters, the Latin letters, the Etruscan letters, the ancient Greek. You could even look at some Egyptian hieroglyphics if you want. And if you really want to mess around, look at cuneiform. I mean, those came, as Michael Brown was showing, there's some similarities. And it's like, well, sure, there's similarities. It's Semitic language-based group.
So if you take any language, since all the letters derived from this, and you take words in other languages and use the paleo on them, will you still come up with somewhat of the meaning that they really are?
That's a very interesting point. So let's just take an arbitrary word. If you take the word, for example, I've mentioned Oregon. Here's an English word, Oregon. Oregon, the state. End of the trail, interpretive center, the end of the Oregon Trail, right there. And they say, we don't know where the name Oregon comes from. They suspect it was the name of a flower, maybe the name that the Indians gave it, but no Indians claim to have given it that name. The Russians used to be there, but it's not a Russian word. Nobody knows, so let's just pretend it's the name of a flower that some Indian said looked like Oregon. Whatever. Now, if I'm going to take the sound of the syllables, the word or is light. If you make it ori, that makes it my light. And gan, gimel nun, is garden. So, my Oregon, my light garden. Or you could say that refines down to garden of light.
Or garden of my light.
Sure, you could say garden of my light. Either way. Sometimes the my is referring to the person speaking, and sometimes the my is referring to the subject itself. It itself has light. So there's right there, there's two different ways. What is the my referring to? Is the garden the my, or is the person naming the garden the my? That's what I'm saying, that you have to see, there's that way of looking at Hebrew words and phrases where you have to define who's the subject, is it talking about, that kind of thing. Well, let's look at it in English. If I said the equivalent of the O is the ayin, and then you've got a resh, and then you've got a hey, and then you've got a gimel or a gun. See, this phonetic vowel in garden doesn't even exist. But if we're just going to look at Hebrew and English,
Where'd you get the hay?
E.
Oh.
So that could be an E, but S sometimes is pronounced as an aleph. Gimel, I could say there's an ayin, and I could say that's a nun, but maybe there is no ayin, or maybe it's a gun, maybe that's, or as some people say, more it's or gun. Oregon. A lot of people call it that, so, you know, maybe that's a vav. So then what I'd do is I'd say, well, ayin resh, I know that means to be vigilant, or to watch. And resh aleph is to see. Hey gimel, haga is the word to navigate, or to spell words, or to ponder or think. Gimel ayin, I think that's just the name to like quack like a duck, I think. I'd have to look that up in the dictionary. Ga. I'm not sure what the word gimel ayin, here, let me want to look it up real quick. You want to look it up? If it was gimel vav noon or just gimel noon, that could be garden. But let's see what that says. So to answer your question, can you do this? Like, yeah, but you're just playing around. You know, you can't make any declarative statements like thus saith. But if you're just messing around, just mess around. I mean, you might come up with stuff. Like, for example, we talked the other day about Iowa, I-O-W-A. You know, the letter yod is the I sound, is Iowa. Is that an ayin, or is that a hey, or is that some kind of a, maybe an aleph? The W, the V, W, O, or U is a vav. And then you got is that a hey? Or is that a, if that is a sound, A-H, so you could end up with yod, hey, vav, hey, just in the word Iowa, just sitting there messing around looking at the English equivalent. So do you have...
Well, gimel, ayin, noon, yod, ayin is quacking. It's from gimel, ayin, noon.
So this is quack or duck, right? Like quacking like a duck. So be vigilant. See is also to be made perceptible, or to cause to comprehend, or to cause to... So if you're watching, you'll see navigating the spelling of words, what you thought was just is actually the sport of the heavens. Now, is that accurate, what I just said? Oregon. If you're vigilant, what sounds like just quacking of a bunch of stupid stuff. In fact, didn't Michael Brown say yesterday in that tape we watched that this was insane, and what else did he call it? Bogus.
Bogus fantasy.
Bogus fantasy. Insane bogus fantasy. That to me is like quacking. So he said if you think that you can navigate the spelling of words and see anything in it, it's just insane bogus fantasy quacking. Okay, well, I disagree, but I'm suggesting that if you look at the words, you can really see something, and there's not insane bogus fantasy quacking.
Well, the biggest thing is that it agrees with the Peshat level.
Sure, that's the key right there. See, the rabbinical model of study is that you have 4 levels. There might even be more than 4, but it's pardes, like we have paradise. P-R-D-S. Peshat, that's the surface narrative, just the way the story reads. Ramez, isn't that the allegorical, like you could say this is a parable, and then hints at. And I think the word drosh, that's the allegorical maybe, or that's the deeper study.
Yeah.
And then sod is family secrets. So when people talk about paradise, P-R-D-S, paradise, that basically is like, this is really knowing what these words are all about. That's like the place of paradise. And the word for paradise actually was Eden. Like the Garden of Eden, that was paradise. And the word Eden is actually spelled Ayin Dalet Nun. And there's that word Ayin Dalet, like Moed, which is the place where we get the word heathen, right? Do you know what a hedonist is?
Yes.
A hedonist is somebody who just goes after pleasure. So the word Eden is where we get hedon. So to search for the pleasure as paradise in understanding his words makes us a bit hedonistic.
So you think perhaps something like that is what the enemy did to Chava in the garden?
Mess with words?
Yeah.
He could have easily been twisting words around to kind of, did he say this or did he say that?
Aha.
The Daniel, was it 9? Okay, I'm gonna write something, and I want you to try to figure out what it means. I'm gonna get it right out of the scripture regarding this word Eden. Okay, so the word Eden literally is the Garden of Eden. Okay, what does Eden mean? Does anybody? I just told you what it means. What does Eden
Well, it's
mean?
pleasure, delightful.
Right. Okay. So.
Paradise.
Huh?
Paradise.
Yeah, so here,
Witness of life.
okay, this is Daniel, don't look it up. Don't look this up.
Michael Dusterbeck.
I always go on with.
Don't even go there. Okay, here, this is what he says. I want you just to be able to think about what this means.
Close it.
Don't look it up.
Everybody's watching you too.
I'll set Dino on you.
We won't let you say anything if you look it up.
And we'll have it on record. We could do the Jeopardy song.
Okay, there you go. Eden, this is the word Eden. So your job is to say, is to figure out, just think about it. Again, this is just brainstorming, right? You're not wrong. You're trying to read these pictures as an illiterate person. This is the word translated Eden, which means pleasant, delightful. Okay, does anybody know what this word Ayandalit means?
See the door.
Okay, so
Or
if
witness.
you have see the door, right? That's an eyeball on the door, and the word is translated as witness. Okay, this word here is exactly the same word.
See the door of life.
Okay, and you're saying it means see, door, in life. Okay, do you see where he comes up with that? Everybody still on board? Okay, so now this is the same word here as these other two, only has something added, which is Nun Yod Nun. Now, so you remember Joshua son of Nun? Okay, in the letter called Nun, that would have been spelled Nun Vav Nun. This is Nun Yod Nun. It's a related word. So they say that the letter Nun is a fish, which is to multiply. It doesn't really mean fish. The word fish is actually dag, which is Dalet Gimel.
That makes sense.
Makes sense?
It does in my brain because
Huh.
I'm thinking of those Dagon hats that look like
Dagon,
fish.
that's exactly the same thing. The fish had Dagon hats. That's why he called the
Yes.
fish god. That's a Semitic word for fish.
Yeah.
And Dagon, but this is not Dagon, this is, so is Nun fish? Well, okay, so the question is Peleg. Does anybody, this is P-L-G. Does anybody remember a fellow by the name of Peleg?
Yeah, division.
Division. Okay, so here's a question. It says, in his days the earth was divided. This is right after the flood. What happened in the event called the earth was divided? What was that event?
The flood.
No, it was after the flood.
Oh,
In
no.
his days, the earth was divided.
Well, you look at either the continents separated or the language.
The
or-
people.
Okay, so it could be language. It could be continents. What else?
Peoples.
Well, the peoples were divided by the languages, according to the Tower of Babel incident. What else? Somebody said that perhaps the flood happened, and they started living, they got a few thousand people going, and somebody gets the big idea, hey, what does this place even look like? So he built a ship and went around cruising around, because remember, people were living 1,000 years still, or pretty close to it, right after the flood. And he mapped the world. So if you are mapping the world, you're actually Ayin Resh Kaf, you're dividing things up and laying them out so that you can say, oh, here we are. So there was some maps of Antarctica shown as being 2 forested islands. In our day and age, we think of it as just being one big giant block of ice, and then some people say that they've done research and found it to be 2 islands. Other people say, no, it's like one big giant pizza crust. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But somebody said that it was determined to be 2 big giant islands. And how would you know that unless somebody went down there while it was not a frozen block of ice?
Because didn't they have maps that showed
Yes.
how they've proven that those maps were correct?
Unless the world's flat, in which case it's not correct. But yeah, in some line of thinking, there is this validation. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not claiming one or the other. But what I'm saying is, to map the continents can be what this is about. Peleg. Okay, so here's the question. Why is this word here? Okay, how would you read this? Just so you know, well, I want to go about that. What does Dalit Noon mean? Remember I said I'll stick Dino on you? Dino? This is Danny. Here's Danny boy.
My decision.
Here's Dan. Here's Dan. So Danny has to do with my decision. That's Dalit Noon. Dan. And you could say, well, look at Dalit is a door, and Noon is an action. So my decision, the judge says, here's a line, and it's either that or that. And if you're playing football or something, and the ball lands right there, it's like, oh gosh, is that fair or foul? Which side? And the judge's decision is to call it one way or the other. Whatever he calls, that's what it is. And nowadays we have, instant replay. The refs can look at the camera, but the referee has to make the call which side of the line. So that's Dan. It's his decision. Okay, so here if you have witness of seeing a door, but a door is a decision, so you could say somebody has to witness and see and make a decision. So how would you translate this phrase? So I'm just trying to take this one verse and give you a little very real-time experience of if you were hired by King James to translate this verse from the pictograph into the modern English, what do you think this verse means? This is just part of a verse. How would you do it? Just from pictographs, and you're illiterate, so I'm not going to tell you, hey, no cheating on the internet.
No, I'm not. I'm looking
okay.
at something different that related a little earlier.
Okay. So I'm just saying, if you had to take from the pictographic letters, and we already know a little bit, we use the dictionary a little bit. We know that Dan means my decision. We know that Eden means pleasant and delightful. We know that Ayin Dalit means witness. We know that Peleg means to divide. In fact, here, let's look at this Peleg a little closer. Pay is, you know what pay is?
No.
No.
Okay, so here you have a mouth. That was not working. So what is lamed?
Learn or teach or
Mouth, teach, and what's Kimmel?
the walking or the camel.
Transport.
Okay, let's say transport, or camel, or walking, or say you could say even moving.
Llama could be authority too.
Okay, so now you have mouth, authority, and moving, transport or transpose. Okay, yeah, I could say, wait a minute. Mouth, teach, transport, authority, moving, transport. That almost sounds like translation. The authority of the mouth moving to another sounds to me like translation. The word log, L-G, is where you get the Greek word logo. So there's something about dividing up languages or translating with some authority of the mouth. This is how you organize or make distinctions in languages. So if you know how to translate is making sense out of that which was diverted and divided. So it's either the division of language or it's a translation, which is the other direction. So if the division of language breaks it all up, going away, like at Babel, translation is the bringing back, which is the other route of the camel, right? If the camel is back and forth.
So if you were to look at that, you could say to witness the delightful, pleasant, and to make a decision, or my decision to multiply and to speak with authority, or to teach the what back and forth or whatever, so you can see the door of life, or see the door of life.
Or is this the one who seeks to change the dates and times? Or
Don't try to guess what they translated it as.
I know what it is translated as.
Okay, that's enough of that.
Is the ion ever to experience, or is it something very much what you see with your eyes? See
Okay,
your
the
witness,
letter ion, or the word ion, it says means weigh carefully, balance exactly. It's the visible part, so it's gleam or sparkle. To comprehend, to really make sense out of what becomes evident, but it's also a deep well or a fountain. So a deep well, you can't see that until it comes up and turns into it. Now you can determine that. So take something that's hidden and assess what you see to make it comprehensible. That's ion. So you could take from the deep, okay, from a deep unknown, assess a value of pleasant, delightful. So find, so you could say, find to be pleasant a deep unknown. Choose to find yourself for your own regard, the pleasantness from like the well of the deep ion that comes up to sprout from a deep unknown. You have determined it to be valuable. By golly, that sure sounds like Paleo-Hebrew to me. But how do you plug that in? Just so you know, I didn't write on here yet, is that this word ayin dalet, which is witness, is also translated as until.
Or forever.
Or it's a witness of forever. Like, you ever hear the phrase forever and ever? to infinity and beyond. Leolam va'ed. That ed is that ever, the other witness, the sidekick. So this is the ed of va'ed. Va means end. For Leolam is forever and ever. You betcha. And how? You know, it's that extra cherry on top, as it were. So how would you put this together? Okay, I'm going to give you one other little clue from the dictionary meaning. This word Eden means pleasant and delightful, but Adanin, where you duplicate the second letter and make it the third, whether or not you stick in a Vav or a Yod, or whether it was simply Dalet, Nun, it's to amplify what's going on. So Adanan is to be like really great, really pleasant, really delightful, over the top. So now what is that? Any ideas? There's a time that the time that this is referring to will be testified or borne witness by as something really pleasant getting extremely pleasant and dividing up the pleasantness? Or what's really pleasant? Find to be pleasant a deep unknown, sounds like Paleo-Hebrew to me, and then it becomes really great. Why would it become really great? Multiplies, it becomes very productive, and then translating all the languages, or maybe where you can see that all the other languages have embedded within them as the deep unknown the same truth? Is this a matter of studying language and realizing the truth of the matter, that they all go back to point to the very truth that was lost at Babel, that was embedded within the original Hebrew? I just so you know, I haven't processed this through exactly in this frame of mind before, so I'm trying to do this with you.
Going back to Eden.
Kind of like going back to Eden. So I have kicked around this idea before, and I have talked about it before in a couple of the videos, but I'm just trying to process this because I didn't exactly go there with this verse before. So what I'm saying right now is I'm real time with you trying to process these words with your assistance. Is going back to Eden, is this talking about the inverse event of the Tower of Babel? Tower of Babel was being fragmented going back, and like the Gimel goes back and forth. So here, we're coming back, bringing all the translations to the original pleasant and delightful witness, which is the Hebrew language. So at the time that we just realize that this is just so great.
Restoration of all things.
So this is the restoration, you might say, to the Edenic language back before Babel, by which all things are made to be delightful, or put back into the best, purest form. So again, the word language is shin pei hey. It's also lashon, but lashon is like teeth coming against each other, whereas shafa, shin pei hey, is smooth lip. That means restore to health and cure from lunacy, smooth and clear, which is said in the Hebrew language. Okay, so can anybody rephrase this in your own words that might sound a little better?
Okay, I know. I'm not really able to do that yet, but that last word, the ayin dalet noon, is idan.
Yep.
When I see that, I see, when I was thinking restoration, I think restore more than pleasant. When I look at the letters, when I think about sort of like see the door to life, or to that sprout of life, I think more of restoration for some reason in my mind than pleasant.
Springtime is the door of life. Springtime is where the dead of winter turns green, comes back to life, the birds come out, the insects come out, the chirping, everything gets... I'll tell you, in Oregon, I mean, you've got snow here now, but in Oregon, just a few days ago, the sun came out, and suddenly you got twice as much energy.
Yeah.
Gosh, I gotta get stuff done, and the day ends too soon, it's like, and then the next day it's cloudy and it's rats, But the sun is invigorating somehow, especially if you come out of a bleak, long, dreary. So something about the door to life is that springtime of vive, of regeneration.
I suppose a guy could also say forever or until, we witness that which is delightful and very delightful, or even in making a decision, or our own decision, if you will, to multiply in that, and then as well as to speak with our mouth and teaching his ways or his word, and to see the door of life.
Okay, say that again in fewer words.
Well, basically giving witness forever, if you will,
Speaking witness
to that
of that which endures forever, even.
Yep, which is that which is pleasurable and extremely pleasurable, making a decision and multiplying by speaking or confessing that which is his word, or the logos, or log, or the teaching with feet, so you can see the door to life.
Okay, for the last few days we've been discussing the ancient Hebrew and the benefits and the covenant and the restoration of the kingdom. Didn't you just describe the very thing that this study is about? I mean, recognizing that Yeshua is the one who is the living one, born witness of in the alphabet, and to increase the delight by realizing the translation from English back to Hebrew, or Greek to Hebrew, or Spanish to Hebrew, or Russian to Hebrew, or Arabic to Hebrew, whatever, that you can see that within the language is the message telling us that endures forever. These are the words of life. To read the language as the instructions of life which endure forever, and that they're not just pleasant and delightful, they will cause, like a multiplication of fish, to bring back an abounding life. If we just would do what these words say. I've had people, my own friends, tell me, if I think that the course of the earth at this moment, where we see it just headed downhill, like a truck with no brakes, downhill on ice, ready to smash into something, if I think that this is recoverable, I'm a complete idiot, and they don't even want to talk to me anymore. And yet, we talked earlier about people who's had the real experience of two vehicles passing right through each other and not crashing. How does he do that? He reserves for himself the occasion of intervention to reach in and just change things. That's what he does. He reaches in and changes things if the circumstances are appropriate. And consistently through Scripture, what circumstances have to be at play for him to reach in and change things for his people's benefit. We turn back to his words and find them pleasant, delightful, instead of bitterly complaining. Every single time, that's the key to the story.
So instead of translating all these Bibles into other languages, they need to be teaching Hebrew. The Paleo Hebrew.
You think?
I do.
Because it's like,
I do.
literally, it's just hitting me that what we're doing right now is being a witness at how delightful, I mean, really delightful it is when you discover the language. And when you see it, you see this new door, you almost like have this new life.
So, not only, in my own experience, not only is what you said true, where as you look at this, you see the door to life, but then you realize that the Scriptures suddenly open up with a new door of life that says, see how rotten it all is? It could get better. He could change it. He could make the dead stick sprout. He could make Yeshua, who was put to death, resurrect. He could make Israel, who was never to be found for the last 3,000 years, suddenly reappear. He could suddenly have Israel, who was in slavery to Egypt, free, walking across the water, and the Egyptian Pharaoh and his army drowning. Where did that come from? He does that stuff. And for us to see in the language that door to life from the deep unknown, he can make happen at his time for his people, because he reserves the right of intervention, but it's always yoked to our attitude. So Joshua and Caleb said, those giants, he can take them out and give us their land and their houses, and we're going to eat the food off their table and drink the wine from their vineyards.
Absolutely.
That's what he promised. That's what he promised. Eden, pleasant and delightful, and even beyond our wild imaginations. What do we have to see? Yeshua said, I'm the door. The door to what? He claimed to be the door to life. He said, if there's anybody hungry, come to me and eat. This is a picture of a fruit. There's a picture of a well. There's all these things in the pictographs, and as you ponder them, you can come up with all kinds of stuff. So we can choose to see here the same way the language was translated away in division, bringing the languages back to the common root of Edenic. Thank you, Isaac Moseson, for the work you're doing. This is actually a prophecy of what's in front of us. So if not only we can see, hey, there's great, boy, I feel great to see these things, and oh, hey, I know that he can do these things. The question is, what is this talking about? Now, you want to read the verse that this is translated as?
Times and a half times.
Here you go. This is from Daniel, what is it, 7:25 or 8:7?
And then the other one's
7:25. This is translated until time, times, and half a time. See, John, you asked me yesterday, how is English different than Hebrew?
Yeah.
What we just said has been translated 3.5 years. 3.5 years? 3.5 years what? Time, times, and half a time. Where do you get time, times, and half a time? So what's the context of this? This is even another kick in the head. Daniel saw this image, this vision of these 4 beasts. And he saw this 4th beast, which was just really disturbing him. That's Daniel 7:15. And then he asks the angel, I believe it's Gabriel, so here this archangel, and Daniel says, what is this 4th beast? So the other beasts are generally regarded as Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Or maybe it's Babylon, it's Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece, and then the 4th beast is supposed to be Rome. But this is what he says, the 4th beast. There will be a 4th kingdom on earth that will be different from all kingdoms. So it's not your regular kingdom with a king and an army and so much that you'd expect. It will devour the entire earth and trample and crumble it. 10 horns. From that kingdom, 10 kings will arise. Another one will rise up after these, who will be different from the former ones, humble 3 kings. He will speak words against the Supreme One. He will exhaust the holy Supreme Ones. He will plan to alter seasons and law, and they will be given over into his hand 3.5 years. Time, times, and half time. So this is the verse that everybody thinks is about the tribulation. Is it about the tribulation, or is it about something else? Well, huh?
Us coming back to his words.
But judgment will be set, and they will take away his dominion, to be annihilated and destroyed completely, and the kingship, the domination, and the grandeur of the kingdoms under all heavens will be given to the holy supreme nation. Its kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey it. And then Daniel says, verse 28, until here is the end of the description. I, Daniel, my thoughts frightened me greatly. My countenance changed, but I guarded the matter in my heart. It's like, man, he was just completely undone at the vision of this 4th beast. So, we don't have the time to sit here and nitpick every little verse, every little word, that whole thing, but the question is, you back up to verse 19, I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from them all, exceedingly terrifying, with teeth of iron, claws of copper. It devoured and crumbled, trampled what remained with its feet. Verse 20, 12 horn on his head, other one came up, 3 fell before it. Okay, now, here's just for what it's worth. You can think that I'm insane, that's okay, I'm just trying to throw out ideas. We're sitting here seeing that in this phrase, it seems to be talking about realizing that in the words that Yahuwah gave us, which are His family words, there's another way to read them that is a matter of great rejoicing, great delight. And it seems to be indicating that He's going to make everything great, which seems to be in cooperation or in league with the message which is in the whole Aleph-Bet, which is in the whole Scripture, which is to say, here's the words, the matters, the Devarim, by which you will be enriched, made wealthy. Health, wealth, prosperity, the Ten Commandments, the words of the covenant made between Yahweh and Israel. And repeatedly, when Israel turns back on the words, despising them, thinking that they're foolish nonsense, the world comes crashing down on Israel, the kings of the earth raise up, spend thousands of years killing each other with armies. And whenever Israel comes back to these very words and considers them to be pleasant and delightful, the kings of the earth lose their power and Israel is lifted up. That's what it's talking about at the end of that chapter. Then the verse back there before we started reading talks about how this fourth beast, different than other kingdoms, has teeth of iron and claws of copper. Teeth is I think that's the word for shanim. Anyway, I'm just going to go off the top of my head here. It'll take too long to lay my eyes on the words. I did this study a couple of years ago, but the point is, as I was studying through this and picking through the words, it seemed to describe chewing up languages. And then it said it trampled what it didn't chew up with its feet, which is regal. Well, regal is where we get the word regal, regulations, customs, habits, and traditions. Say, wait a second. Could it be that this beast is like the publishing houses, which chews up all the words and telling you what to believe with certain translations, and you have no access to the other things?
Or trying to destroy them even.
Or trying to destroy the truth of these things with its mouth, speaking great words, and if it were possible, even the Holy Supreme Ones, as it says in English, would be overwhelmed. But what people aren't studiers, and people who don't really look into the words, it will trample with its feet. That word regal is customs, habits, and traditions. So if it changes the words and chews up all the meanings of things for the intelligentsia, you might say, for the people who study and the people who think, and all these words get chewed up and can't make sense out of them, so thus the fourth beast rules. And for those people who don't do that, it sweeps them along, trampling them, and which is the word for subduing, like the word Lord is where you get the word road, which is to be stomped down, crushed, and paved like a steamroller, by customs, habits, and traditions, like the national holidays and cultural things that we even find are Earth Day. Well, what's that? That's not a bad thing, but Earth Day, everybody has to do Earth stuff today, and if you're not, you're a big creep or something. It's like, so you invent these customs and habits and traditions for the people who don't get into the words, but this beast was given dominion to just devastate the world until we come back and find His words delightful, at which time He'll flip the table, flip the seesaw, undo the beast, take away his dominion, and the dominion and the grandeur of the kingdoms will be given to the holy supreme nation. That's Israel. Its kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and its rulers will serve and obey it. What's that, the last 1,000 years? Now that's another way to read it. Now, if we took that, we could say, forget those other words. Let's go with this. That's the heart that Joshua and Caleb had. Though they saw the giants with their iron chariots. And then there's this verse in the first of the book of Judges, I think. Anyway, Judges chapter 2, I think it is, where it says, Judah, coming into the land, conquered the giants of the mountains because Yahweh was with them. Woohoo! But the giants of the plain, they had iron chariots. So Yahweh couldn't help them. That's what it says. They couldn't defeat the giants of the plain. Why? Well, they had iron chariots. Something doesn't work. Something in that English translation doesn't fit.
Yeah.
They did not conquer the giants of the mountains because they lacked iron chariots. Well, they couldn't ride the chariots around the mountains. They conquered them because Yahweh was with them. But he couldn't be with them because those guys had iron chariots. So you look at the word that spells iron chariots. The word iron is Brazil, Bet Resh Zayin Lamed, and the word for chariots is Merkabah, Mem Kaf Resh Bet Hey, I think. Anyway, it means to be in tandem with, like horse and rider, or like a knight on a horse. But the point is, if you write those words together and you look at them, what I saw was in those words, using the dictionary, the meaning of every letter, is this phrase. Surprisingly, astonishingly, the same way you'd reach over to a pitcher of water and open the tap and all the water drains out. Their strength, when they saw the iron chariots, so Yahweh couldn't help them. They defeated themselves by mentally processing the appearance of the iron chariots. Their strength drained out, so Yahweh couldn't help them. Now, if that's what really happened, then for us to say, Jesus will do it for us, is inconsistent with that story. For us to take heart with the enthusiasm that these very words made you feel that you expressed a few minutes ago is 180 degrees opposite, which is what Joshua and Caleb expressed. And those are the two guys that got to go into the promised land, and they conquered the giants, lived in their houses, and ate the food off their table. So what I'm saying is, by looking at the ancient Hebrew text, if we can find it to be the source of strength and vitality, because we believe that He made a forever covenant, because we are His people, and He delights in us because we have chosen to delight in Him, then every single word of this covenant out of His mouth has the authority to flip things this way or that way, depending on our attitude, how we line up, how we choose to believe it, and the Eden that we experience is going to be a direct product of our own attitude. Therefore, when He says, make for yourselves, Jeremiah 31, signposts, to encourage each other, conform your own mind and heart to what these words tell you, walking on the road together so that you can make this a reality. It's not us making it a reality. It's playing into His story by which His story can become our reality. And the story is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dal, He, Vav, Zayin. Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lam, Mem, Nun, Samach, Pei, Zadi, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. And if we were at the place right now, as I was suggesting the other day, of Pei, the mouth opening up, Zadi sprouting, it's also a picture of the scepter of righteousness. Open up the words and do righteousness, and what will happen? Kuf, ascending to the Resh status, Reshin, licensed and authorized, to have permission. We've been denied permission for the last 6,000 years because we didn't find His words to be delightful. And so what I'm suggesting is that the alphabetic pattern, not only is it a picture of Yeshua's life, not only is it a picture of the entire course of the world, such that when a man dies, goes into the grave, yet he will resurrect on that great day unto butterfly status, Kuf Reshim Tav. But it's also the picture of Israel in a temporal zone where Israel was thrown into captivity, Het. Israel gets to sprout out, Zadi, and Israel rises up to the status that we just read about here. The Holy Supreme Nation will be an everlasting kingdom. All rulers will serve and obey it. That's not the kingdom of heaven in the distant future, because it's talking about an everlasting kingdom that other rulers serve and obey. Well, who other rulers? People of the earth? So somebody in their own dispensational translation of this will say, phooey, nonsense, this has to do with the by and by in the heavenly realm. And it's like, what does it say? What does it mean? So, again, if you want to believe that Yahweh would do such a thing as to give us words to come back to restore the vision of the hope, the door of life, because we take understanding of the words that have been hidden in the deep abyss of the unknowing, finding them to be pleasant. That sure sounds like the Paleo-Hebrew. The word paleo, by the way, means wonderful, marvelous, amazing, mystery of being hidden. So I'm just saying, playing into the meaning of the word ayin, the door of life. This is the decision by which you jump. Nun jumps out of the mem, which is this pawn into, you might say, look at insect life again. You know, the mosquito larva that lives in the water jumps out and starts flying around. I mean, if you want to use a mosquito as a model of what's happening here instead of the butterfly, but it's the same picture. I'm saying we could encourage ourselves with pictures that fit his promise. And so, as you said, it's not a matter of saying, ox, house, camel, door, rah, that means nothing. Find the pictures which fit the promise. And it has to remain consistent with that primal theme. And the primal theme is validated by Yeshua himself. Aleph, the maker from the heavens and the earth before the creation of the earth. Bet, the creation of the universe. Gimel, Voyager coming down to Dalet, the earth, like the top half of the hourglass to the bottom half of the hourglass. Looking like a man to reveal the man the way back to the Father's house. But that man who is designated to be special, Zion, was also put to the weapon, Zion, put into the tomb, Tet, the round rock rolled in front, Tet, Yod, the hand that sealed and held it shut, he said was not the Roman seal, but it was his own doing. His hand, no man takes my life, I take it. Okay, then you have Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samak, and Pei. We could discuss those, but to jump ahead, you got Zadi, the resurrection, Kuf, the ascension, and also the coming back as Reshim Tav, the blazing one, and fiery glory of El Shaddai, Tav accomplishing the covenant. If you want to look at the three matters in between, Kaf, Lamed representing the Torah, learn the instructions, Mem, Nun, take them to heart, Samak, and Pei, Micah 6:8, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. This is the life. This is how it works. Take the seed in, learn the instructions of the Torah, Kaf, Lamed. Take the seed to heart, nurture it like a woman nurturing a baby within her, where you are becoming the life transformed by the seed of the word of Elohim that you took in. And then, like he said, Samak, I'm the vine, you are the branches. The seed becomes the vine whereby you bear fruit. The letter Ayin looks like fruit. Do justly, that's what you do. Love mercy. When the other guy steps on your toes, don't just elbow him in the face. Just have mercy. With that measure of mercy you use, it'll be measured to you. And pay the mouth. We eat of the fruit. So if the fruit we bear is mercy, then we all serve to benefit from the same, what goes around comes around. And this is where the life is lived. Samak, and Pei, and you can look at variations of the spelling of those three letters, shuffling them around. But that's like the three things in the Kadosh place. The promise set before us, if we just be about this business, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim, you walk humbly with him, walking in the Moedim and the Shabbat. There's this sprout promise. This sprout has to happen. This other sprout, there's one type of sprouting Nun, this other type of sprouting Zadi. That type of sprout comes out of the Het. and then the sprout lifts up and puts out the shading over, which is the kuf. And so there's this whole picture of planting seeds, nurturing seeds underground in the mem, like him in the tomb, and then the seed sprouting and branching out, like the mustard seed picture, where all the birds and the beasts find shade, is this resh, this great noble thing. That great noble thing is the kingdom of the Holy Supreme Ones, what is it? Kadashim Elyonin, I think it's what it's called. My point is, there's these picture themes all through it that have to do with Yeshua, that has to do with the covenant of Israel, with Yahweh. And if we choose to take that as the central theme by which every word has to play to and be true to, then it's not a matter of ox house, camel door. Those pictures still retain their essence even in this other way. But it's a cryptic way, so I think that when Daniel hid the words and sealed the book, by modifying him into the flame letters, he retained a certain value. And yes, the words even before the flame letters, Aleph was still an ox, but he was given the wisdom to make them in such a way that people who study the great things like Michael Brown, when he says the noon position of Daniel 12, they will be elucidated, clarified, and refined by many. But they're hidden and sealed. And it's not until the time of them being allowed to come back will anybody understand them. And I believe that's this time. Hence, I would agree that what we all came up with is a much more valid meaning, though 3.5 years might have something to do with something. I don't know, that's a different study. But I think what we just came up with is an incredible study, well worth the time of sitting there and kicking it around.
And all creation groans for the revealing of the sons and daughters of Elohim. And so, just like Yeshua said, I give this to you in parables, it's only for you to know, not for the rest of the world. Then we're the ones that are going to be teaching, because he reveals it to us. His people will be the ones teaching the nations if they desire to learn.
And the teaching is the stuff that's right in here.
Right, absolutely.
Because I'm not, to get this, I am not referencing a library full of books or thousands of hours of teachings on the internet.
Neither did Yeshua's disciples, neither did his. And that's what the Pharisees said, who are these men?
Where do you get this stuff from? I think it's all right there embedded in the alphabet and in the meanings of the words. Anyway, does anybody else have anything they want to contribute?